Everyone, my name is Lindsay and you are watching Lindsca Adventure, and today we are adventuring through another Bible story just like we do every single Friday. Now I just want to let you guys know that this I think is my fourth take of this video, and I got about half an hour into each one previously and something happened and it was very frustrating, so I had to take a little break, went to the gym, try to get some endorphins going and just wake up and release my frustration in a healthy and helpful kind of way. So I'm back now. But for you guys, if I didn't tell you, you probably wouldn't know. But anyway, that's why if you're keeping track, this video will probably come out a little bit later than usual in the evening. But ideally, it will still come out on a Friday. So yes, back at it. Anyway, brief, random introduction over. I would like to tell you a story, as per usual, about this guy called Abraham. Now, we've chatted about Abraham a couple of months ago now. You can go and check out the video. It's called Abraham and the Covenant, if I recall correctly. And that is based in Genesis chapter 15, but the story we're looking at today is actually just the previous chapter. Yeah, I've noticed that recently I've been telling stories that are very close together, and a lot of them are in Genesis, and it's like tell a later story first and then an earlier story second, and just kind of go backwards in the storyline. So anyway, that's what we're doing today. We're going backwards again. And yeah, let me give you a little bit of extra backstory about what's going on here. So in Genesis chapter 12 is when we first see God call Abraham. At the time, his name is Abram, his wife is Sarai. They get their names changed to Abraham and Sarah. And so God calls Abraham to get up and take his family and go somewhere where I'll take you. I'll let you know when we get there. And so Abram's like, sure, okay. So he takes his wife and he takes his nephew Lot, so his brother's son. And they go on an adventure and they're like, where are we going? I don't know. All right, cool. Let's do it. So yeah, they head off into this promised land, and yeah, so they get there, and then after a little bit they go down to Egypt, but then they have to come back really quickly because they had some issues because Sarah was a little bit too pretty and the Pharaoh was keen and Abraham didn't know how to handle that like a reasonable human. And so they got in a little bit of trouble. So they're back in Canaan now. And so Abram, Sarai, and Lot are there, and Abram and Lot, they had quite a lot of wealth. Like, God was blessing them, and they, I guess, were kind of renting pasture or something at the time, and they were all together, but there were two distinct households. And so as they were growing more, they had bigger and bigger flocks of sheep and various cattle, and the herdsmen were actually having issues with each other. So Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen were fighting because there wasn't enough pasture for both of them to be in the one place because there's just too many animals. They're just too blessed, you know? It's a good problem to have, but it did cause a problem. And so to solve this problem, Abram chats a lot and he's like, look, God's blessed me and blessed both of us and has promised me all of this land. So you pick which part of the whole land of Israel that you want to take, and you can go settle there, and I'll just take whatever you don't want. And so Lot's like, all right. And so he has a think about it, and he decides it would be a really good idea for him to move down to the cities of the plain and basically move into Sodom and Gomorrah. As we know later on, that was not the greatest idea. But yeah, so that's where he moves, and so Abram ends up hanging out up in the hills, and he moves into basically a place called Hebron, but in this story, he moves into a place called the Terebinth Trees of Mamre. And yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. So basically that's where we're at in the story. That's chapter 13, and now we're caught up, and let's get into chapter 14. Now, before we get there, I just want to let you guys know I'm a bit of a nerd, and if I haven't told you that already, I love maps, like Bible maps. So as a kid, whenever I would read a Bible story and I you know, there was some place mentioned, I was like, okay, let's go to the back of the Bible and look at the maps and study it for a while and figure out where this happened and where is it in relation to something else that happened. And yeah, I always found that really, really interesting, and I found it really helpful to understand the Bible better. If you haven't given that a try, I really, really recommend it, and I'll be showing you a couple maps tonight to really explain what's going on, because there's a lot of various places that we're going to be discussing in this story today. So the first map I'm going to show you, I just found these on the internet. I printed them out. I don't even know where they're from. They're just like in the Google Images sort of page. So basically, to start with, oh yeah, so over here, let's start over here. So this is like the land of Canaan over here, where all of these various words and various colors are. Well, it's black and white, but it used to be in colors. Then sort of like this general space is like just desert. There's not a lot going on here. And these are some rivers. And this is like the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Nile and Egypt. We don't really need to know about that much. But yeah, what we're looking at today is, and this little line here, that is the Jordan River in Israel, and the Dead Sea, and the Sea of Galilee, or the Sea of Kinnereth up the top. Yeah, so basically we are looking at this area and this area today. Now, just so, we have a few other things. So Salem, right there, Salem, that eventually gets renamed to be Jerusalem. And Hebron is just where Abraham is living at the moment. And over here somewhere, Sodom. There we go. So at the base of the Dead Sea, we have Sodom and Gomorrah and a couple other cities there. They're pretty hard to find on a map today because archaeologically they're difficult to find, because it's likely that they're at the bottom of the Dead Sea when the Dead Sea had a lower sea level. Yeah. So let me just read before you guys completely tune out and click away. So let me just start reading. So chapter 14, so Genesis chapter 14, starting at verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer king of Elam, and Tidal king of nations," or otherwise translated king of Goyim, "that they made war with Bera king of Sodom, Bersha king of Gomorrah, Shinab king of Admah, Shemeber king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela," who isn't named, and Bela is also known as Zoar. Okay, now that's a whole bunch of other stuff that's probably making your mind go fuzzy. So basically, the first people who are named live over here, where basically Babylon would be, and like down the track. So Elam is in bold and big because it's the most important city-state there. And then so Elam and Goyim and Shinar and Elasar, these are 4 like little city-state nations, and they made war with these guys over here, all those ones in the black writing. Okay, so there's 4 guys from here against 5 guys over here, basically. So we get a little bit of backstory. Okay, so first of all, the 5 who are in the south of Canaan, they are all kind of allied together. And then we find out that actually 12 years prior, in the past 12 years before this war began, that the 5 kings in the south of Canaan, so Sodom and Gomorrah and co., they were serving Chedorlaomer, so this guy from Elam, and they had to send tribute and basically just were like, I think I mentioned vassal suzerain relationships in the other Abraham video that I've done. Go check it out. But basically there would be like a greater king and there would be a lesser king, and the lesser king would, you know, send tribute in order to be protected by the greater king. Now, it was very likely that the greater king would often subdue all the lesser kingdoms around him and make them send tribute, but sometimes they chose to send tribute in order to be in this alliance. But definitely seems like these 5 kingdoms, Sodom, Gomorrah, all those ones, that they didn't want to be in this relationship. And so after about 12 years of serving this particular king, way off in Elam, who, you know, is too far away for him to even care about them, they decide, well, how about we just don't send tribute this year? And so they rebelled in the 13th year. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer finally stood up and took notice. And he's like, okay, well, we got to go and do something about this. We can't just let our, you know, minions run off. So he gets his friendly nations nearby. So it's Elam, Shinar, what was it? Goyim and Elisar. He gets himself and 3 others. They march, I'll show you the map again. They march up along these rivers and then back down over here and basically come to attack these guys. Now, when I was first reading this, I was like, oh yeah, it makes sense that they would just, you know, go from one place straight to the next and just attack the guys who are rebelling. However, that's not actually what happens. So I have a couple other maps for you guys. And I will... yeah, I'll read it and I'll point things out along the way. So it says that they attacked the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Shaveh Kirithaim. Bunch of big words, but basically, so Elam's kind of like over here, and they come over this way, and they come down, and they first attack here, then they attack here, and then they attack here. Now, the Rephaim, the Zuzim, and the Emim, it took me a few times to read through this one chapter before it like really stood out to me. I was like, oh, I remember what those tribes are. If you look, I think it's like in Deuteronomy or possibly Joshua or something around there. It actually tells us that the Rephaim, the Zuzim, and the Emim, along with a few other tribes, like some people from Bashan up in the north of Canaan, these people were actually giants. So Goliath, so as in from the story of David and Goliath, Goliath was one of the descendants of the Rephaim. And he had like 4 other brothers or whatever who were also giants. And so basically these were just tribes of people with giantism or something, and they were like twice the height of your average person, or quite a lot taller than your average person. Yeah, so I find it interesting that let's say the kings from the north, the invading army, they don't go directly to the rebellious kings to just wipe them out and teach them a lesson. They actually start attacking some other places first, and they go first for, I guess, whoever's closest, but also these giant, you know, nations with giants in them. And they take them out as much as possible before heading on their merry way further south and doing it all over again. So they take out these 3 cities first. And then as they keep going, they attack the Horites in the mountain of Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the way of the wilderness. So they come, where are we? So we've gone 1, 2, 3, and now they're coming down this way. I'll bring out the other map. I have a 3rd map. Yeah, so they've kind of come over here, and now they're coming down here. So the Horites live anywhere between here and here. And then they're going to go up here to attack the Amalekites at Kadesh Barnea. And then they're going to go over here and attack the Amorites at Hazazon Tamar. Yeah, so they take out another 3 different like tribes, groups, city-states, whatever you want to call them, political entities. And so that's 2 sets of 3, that's 6. So yeah, before they even get anywhere near the 5 rebellious kings, they have already taken out 6 different surrounding nations. And I find it interesting, like a really interesting tactic that they've used, that they've gone through and they're just teaching all of the land of Canaan a lesson at this point, and they're just going through and knocking out any allies that these 5 rebellious kings could have up their sleeve. They might ask for help to, you know, go against this invading force. And so one by one, strategically, just whoever's closest, not allowing themselves to be engulfed, but actually engulfing those that they're coming to attack. Yeah, so that's what they do. And at the point where they've knocked out, all these 6 different groups, not completely, sure, but very effectively at least. Yeah, so they've come through, they've attacked these 6 different groups, and then the 5 rebellious kings, they're like, all right, they're here now. I guess this is what was going to happen when we didn't send our tribute. So they go out into pitched battle. So back in the good old days of the ancient Near East and, ancient times, it wasn't actually very often that various kingdoms would go head to head in pitched battle. It was usually small skirmishes where people would raid each other, and it wasn't really face to face, but on occasion it did happen. And so the 5 kings brought out their 5 armies, and the 4 kings who are invading from the north, they're there with their 4 armies who have already just been very well, battle hardened at least, so they're not exactly noobs at this job. And so it's 5 against 4. There's a fresh army, these 5 fresh armies and 4, kind of weary over it kind of armies. And the 5 armies are on their home ground. You'd think they'd know where they are and exactly the lay of the land and what's some good tactics to use here. And that the 4 armies who just turned up, that they're tired, they don't know where they are. Maybe it'll be a bit harder for them and a bit less of an advantage for them. However, there's really nothing going for Sodom. So Sodom, actually, backtracking, Sodom is named first in the list of these 5 nations, and therefore it is the principal city amongst the 5. It is the most important one. So when you say Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom always comes first. Sodom, Gomorrah, all these other ones, it comes first, to the point where the guy from, is it Bera? Yeah, King of Bera. They don't even give him a name. He's that unimportant. That city is so unimportant. So yeah, Sodom is the most important one. And it never seems to have a lot going for it. So yeah, all these 5 armies, they turn up and they are in pitched battle against the 4 armies. They're just kind of staring at each other, and the battle begins. And instead of, making heaps of headway, the local army, all the soldiers, half of them get stuck in all these tar pits. They should know that there is tar pits there, asphalt, slime pits in the valley where they live. And yet most of these people are just getting stuck in them, like quicksand kind of thing, and not able to run away. And so those who aren't stuck, they do run away. They run off into the mountains and they disperse, and there is no army. And so the invading force, they come all the way in where they were planning to come in the first place. And they just completely raid and take over the show. And they're like, yay, we're winning. And so they take all these captives, they take cattle and livestock, they take all of these valuables that they can get their hands on from these 5 cities, and they well and truly teach those 5 cities a lesson. Yeah, so at this point, they've got a lot of loot on their hands, and that's not the best thing to be walking around with just across the countryside. And so instead of doing any other raiding, they have really nowhere else they were planning to raid, from what I can tell. They just pack up. They're all right. They basically say, all right, let's go home. Let's take all of, these valuables and these slaves and this cattle and stuff. Let's take it back home to LM and those other countries next door. And yeah, let's divide the spoils and go home. We're done for this day, and the war season should be over. Cool. So they start heading back north to head up to LM, and somebody manages to escape from the 5 cities and runs over to Abram. So let me show you the map again. So this is Sodom and Gomorrah down here, and Abram's chilling over here. So it's about, 60 kilometers away at most, maybe 40, I reckon. And yeah, so the armies come through, have the battle over here. and now they're heading back up to Dan and then back up over to Elam. Oh, yeah, you can see. Cool. So some guy manages to escape, runs over to Hebron, goes and says, Abram, guess what? There was an army and we lost and Lot is taken away. And obviously, so, actually, probably not obviously, I haven't told you this yet. So, yeah, Lot is taken away because, you know, Lot is a citizen in Sodom at this point. And this is a point to think about. Like, he didn't have to be taken away. He didn't have to move there. It was his choice. And he knew by reputation, very, you know, it would have been pretty obvious that this was a city full of sinful people not making the best choices. And obviously that came through in their political choices as well. And so he got himself into a bad situation. And he certainly could have done better. Abram certainly didn't find himself in a bad situation, a bad political environment. Yeah, but because he was unwise in doing so, he ended up being associated with these people, living amongst them, and therefore being caught up in their problems and being dragged off in captivity. And so Abram hears about this, and yeah, he's like, well, obviously I can't let my nephew get, you know, dragged off into captivity. That's not okay. And he's hanging out at the terebinth trees of Mamre. So Mamre is this Amorite guy, and if you remember a few minutes ago, I told you guys that the Amorites were actually the last of the 6 various places or peoples that the kings of the north came and attacked. So the Amorites have also taken a big hit, and so Abram lives at the terebinth trees of Mamre, and Mamre has 2 brothers. Now, from what I understand, brothers could mean his actual biological brothers, or it could mean close relatives, close allies, you know, maybe cousins or second cousins or whatever. And he had his brothers Eshcol and who was the other guy? Aner. And so they're all Amorites and they're all allies with Abram. So they're all happy to be, you know, hanging out together. And they've all taken a hit somehow or other. They've all had relatives that have been attacked and lost lives and all that kind of stuff. And so Abram decides, look, I have to go get Lot, and his allies are like, yep, we're coming too. And so Abram is like 75 years old at this time. He's a dottery old man at this point. And yeah, he decides to take 318 of his own personal servants who he's trained to be swordsmen. And I guess his allies of Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner, they're sending an amount of people as well to go on this chase and try to, you know, face up against 4 kings and their armies who have just taken out 11 different countries just in one quick war season. Yeah, in my mind that's a little bit crazy. I don't know who planned that out. But yeah, like it's really crazy that these 4 kingdoms would just swoop in and just wipe out 11 in a row. It's just crazy. And then to add craziness to it, Abraham's like, all right, let's go and chase them and get my nephew back and all this stuff. Sure, let's do that. Me and my 300 odd young fellas. So they do that and they chase all the way up the coastline. Well, not the coastline, the coast is over here, but they go up the mountains. Where are we? So from Hebron, where they hear about it, and they're just chasing the army all the way up here to Dan, which is probably like 200 kilometers away, I'm guessing, from this little thing down the bottom. I didn't measure it exactly. But yeah, they get all the way up to Dan, and they catch up to the army, because obviously they haven't done as much exercise recently as everyone else has, and they're not quite as tired. So they probably could catch up a bit quicker. And so, yeah, they catch up, and instead, like, nobody's on their home ground at this point, But the armies who've just come through and wiped everyone out and they're taking all of these captives home with them, they're probably really tired at this point, and they want a good sleep every night as much as possible. And so it was, Abram used that to his advantage, and he didn't attempt to have a pitched battle like the other guys had done and obviously lost. And so he used his wisdom, he used his smarts, and he divided up his group probably in 2 or 3 different groups to get the captives and some to attack. And yeah, basically they got back everything that they needed. They went in at night while everyone was asleep and yeah, used some pretty good tactics to get back what they were looking for with a lot less numbers on their side, but a lot more strategy, I guess. So they go in, they're successful, and they manage to chase the armies from Dan past Hobah as they're heading back to Elim. So probably another 30 or 40 kilometers of just chasing the army in the middle of the night. Poor guys. I think it would be really funny because, like, you know, these four armies have come from Elim. They've gone a long march. They've come through. They've cleaned up these 11 different city-states, whatever they are, and they're probably feeling really great about themselves, like, yeah, look at us, we've got all of this stuff that we've taken home with us. And in the middle of the night one night, they're just completely overrun, they're chased away, and it was like, that's the end of their victory, see ya. I just think that's hilarious, that story, and I can't believe how funny the Bible can be if you choose to have as interesting of a humor as I do anyway. So Abram is victorious, and he brings back all of the goods and all of the people, the men and the women, and all the cattle and livestock, and he brings them back to Sodom. And so the king of Sodom comes out to meet him and, you know, thank him and all that kind of stuff. And then we get to verse 18. Now, this is a part of this chapter that a lot of people tend to focus on more because this is where we see the interesting character of the priest king Melchizedek of Jerusalem, or previously Salem. And he's quite mysterious. And some people, because if you read in Hebrews, somewhere in Hebrews, it talks about how King Melchizedek, priest Melchizedek, king priest, we don't know where he comes from. We don't know when he was born, when he died, who his parents were, anything like that. He's just this figure who appears on this one occasion, and there is literally no other genealogical record of him, which in those times is like impossible to have no genealogical record of these things because everyone wants to, you know, keep repeating the names and where they come from and, you know, who their relatives are and all that kind of stuff. So everyone has this like afterlife of being spoken their name, all that kind of thing. And yeah, so it's really very, very strange for this guy who is very famous and, you know, very highly honored, especially like it's like impossible for somebody of that kind of status to have no records of him. So it's, yeah, super duper mysterious. Some people think he's like an alien who came from another planet to watch the human race deal with sin or something. That's a bit of a ridiculous claim, but there's like this whole array of ideas that people have. Some of the closest ideas that I think are reasonable are that he's either Jesus before he, you know, came as Jesus specifically, because we know that God has shown up in the Old Testament quite a few different times in human form, and to Abraham a few different times as well. But it's either Jesus or like a type of Jesus, somebody who represents and looks forward to Jesus. So I think that's the closest thing that we can come up with for him. Do your own research. Nobody has a consensus on this guy. It's really interesting. So basically, so it says in verse 18 that then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him, so Abram, and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And then Abram gave him a tithe of everything he had. So, yeah, that's a little snippet on Melchizedek. That's the part that most people focus on in this whole story. I also find it interesting that Melchizedek brings out bread and wine. So from everything that I've read, at least, bread and wine are very much covenantal foods. They're very ritual type foods. You'll see Jewish people using them in their wedding ceremonies. And so covenant, like, it's basically like a wedding type of agreement, that kind of contract. And to eat the bread and drink the wine really makes you like think of the Last Supper? Yeah, before Jesus died on the cross. So there's all of this imagery and all of this covenantal sort of ritual and imagery and stuff like that that really shows that God's definitely involved in this. And there's this king priest who's coming out and blessing Abraham and blessing God at the same time, which is really nice. Yeah, so that's a cool little snippet just to have a look at. Also, another thing about Melchizedek being a king priest, it's interesting. So Melchizedek obviously isn't an Israelite because there are no Israelites at this point because Israel is like Abram's grandson. And so it's interesting to see how Melchizedek is this not only a follower of God, but is a king and a priest for him. Which is really interesting because when the Israelites finally show up on the scene, God actually tells them specifically that a king is not allowed to do the priestly duties, and a priest isn't allowed to become a king. There's not allowed to be this mixing of politics and religion or spirituality. Like, they're supposed to be two separate entities, but yet God has this follower or whatever he is, and he is actually both. He is both king and priest, which is another thing that makes us think that he could be like Jesus, because we know that Jesus is our king and he's also our high priest in the heavenly sanctuary. So that's some interesting stuff to look into if you're interested in that. Yeah, and I just love the fact that we don't know where he's from, we don't know his ethnic background or anything like that, but he's definitely like outside of the covenant, but he is, this foreigner that, like, this Gentile in a sense, that, follows God and is chosen by God and, loves God and works for him and all that kind of stuff. And God doesn't just stay stuck to his own little group of people. He doesn't work in the ways that we think he does. He doesn't just choose one group and then only choose them and that's it. No, he actually invites every person in the whole wide world, whether they know him or not, to actually have this relationship with him and to work with him and to, be with him. So I always love finding these parts of the Bible where we see somebody who is not Israelite, not a descendant of Abraham, and yet is being loved and used by God, and loves him in return. It's just wonderful. So after this, actually this next part is why I even came to this chapter in the first place this week. So the king of Sodom said to Abraham, "Give me the persons and take the goods for yourself." So basically Abram's come back. He's greeted briefly by the king of Sodom, but in the meantime he has this encounter with the priest king, and he ends up giving a tithe of his own personal possessions, not anything that he got from the spoils of war, but his own personal assets. So not his income, but his assets. He gives this tithe, so it's 10% of all of his possessions, to the priest, in, basically giving it to God. And after this, the king of Sodom comes out to Abram. Now, the king of Sodom is obviously the guy who is the problem in this story. He is the one who would have been, influential enough to instigate the rebellion on the part of the five kings. The king of Sodom is, where, he's Lot's ruler. So therefore he'd be especially happy because Abram went out to go get Lot and therefore all the other stuff that was lost from Sodom. But Sodom and the king of Sodom is like the real antagonist in this whole story. It's not the guys from Elam, not the kings of the north. It's actually Sodom that has caused all of these problems, has gone out of its way to just, you know, bring chaos to the land, basically. And if it wasn't for him and his influence, then all of these 11 tribes and peoples would not have been killed, probably. So this guy, he feels slimy to me, you know? So he comes out and he talks to Abram and he says, give me the people who you've, you know, gotten back. So all of my citizens, and you can take all of like the cattle, all of the valuables that were stolen that you've retrieved and brought back. You can keep them. That's like your wages for winning this war for us. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing, from a thread to a sandal strap, and I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. So there's a bit to unpack in this. Basically, Abram's just gone and had this encounter with God and this priest, and now this slimy king of Sodom, let's call him that, he comes and I don't know what he's trying to do here, but I think Abraham sees straight through it and he's like, I don't want you to say that you are the one who made me rich. I don't want you to think that I owe you anything. I think that's what's really, really going on here. And we see Abram saying, look, I've just given glory to God. I've just had this encounter with him. I've just given him my tithe. I've just basically made this declaration in a sense that God is the one who brings the increase. He brings me wealth. He brings me victory. And I agree with what the priest said, that, you know, God has delivered me from my enemies and he's delivered them into my hand. So I have agreed with that, and to take any kind of wages for winning this war would be basically negating what has just been agreed. And doing so would actually take away the glory that has been given to God in this sense. So God has received the tithe, we've been in agreement, you know, we had this covenantal meal of bread and wine to say that, yeah, that's right, God brought this victory. It wasn't me, it wasn't anybody else, it was all God's doing. And yeah, so for you, slimy king of Sodom, to want to give me part of the victory, that would be, if I were to take it, that would actually be me dishonoring God. And yeah, he wasn't willing to do that, obviously, and he didn't want to be manipulated all at the same time. So he's like, look, I don't want to take anything. I don't want to be manipulated by anybody. I know that this is like culturally acceptable sort of process to give the victor a lot of the proceeds from the war. But I'm fine. I don't need it. Thank you very much. I'm good with that. But I'll just say that I did have some guys, they ate some food along the way, so please just let them be okay with that. And all of my 3 allies, the Amorites, so Mamre and Eshcol and Aner, let them take their spoils of war. I'm not going to push my values and my beliefs on them, because obviously we have different callings, different values, all that kind of thing, different gods even. Yeah, let them take the proceeds that you're offering me, because obviously they were involved in the war as well, and I'm not going to speak for them. So yeah, that's where it ends. Just trying to think. My nose is itchy, sorry. Yeah, so basically the reason why I came to this story, I don't even know how I got onto it, but basically I was just remembering that part at the end where slimy king of Sodom wants to come and, yeah, I guess manipulate Abram into being under his thumb at some point. And Abram is like, look, I don't need to, I have enough allies, thank you so much. I don't need to get in any kind of agreement with you. I can see that you've got issues and that you're causing problems, and I don't want to have anything to do with you. So thank you so much for your kind offer, but I'll be on my way. You can chat to somebody else if you'd like. And yeah, I guess that's the thing that's always really stood out to me most about this story. And I know that a lot of you are wanting to have the best that God has to offer for you in your life. And so I guess what I would encourage you is to see, who are you surrounding yourself with? And who are you allowing to have some subtle influence in your life? Who are the people around you who think that they have some level of control, and are you allowing them to do that? Like, is something that you are doing or saying or not doing or saying actually allowing them into your space? Like, do you have good enough boundaries to say, look, thank you so much for your kind offer, but God is the one who, you know, provides for me. I don't need you to provide for me financially, or I don't need to live under your roof, or, you know, all those kind of things. If God is calling you elsewhere, to a higher, you know, way of living and for serving Him, are there places and people that you can sort of leave out of your life, so that you can be blessed without their influence kind of souring it? Yeah, I think there's a few other things that you can pull out of this, but that's the thing that stands out to me the most. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the story, with all of its nerdiness and all of its, you know, kings and kingdoms and maps and all those kind of things. So yeah, that's it from me today. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and a beautiful new week, and I will see you again next Friday. Okay, love you guys. Bye.